Imagination is not often talked about as an educational tool or pedagogical practice. When we think about what makes a good educator, we usually think of qualities such as being organized, creative, knowledgeable, personable, and having strong classroom management. But what exactly is imagination? One definition given by Alan R. White states that to imagine something is to think of it as possibly being so, and that an imaginative person is one with the ability to think of lots of possibilities, usually with some richness of detail. He adds that imagination is linked to discovery, invention, and originality because it is thought about the possible rather than the actual. Well, I think this is a fair definition. When I think of imagination, I think about my childhood. I have always had a strong imagination. As a child, I loved playing with action figures. I would set up detailed battles and storylines, often with the different characters I had at my house. I would play for hours with nothing but my mind to guide me. I also love playing sports, especially basketball and soccer outside of my house. Again, I would create these games and stories, imagining myself playing alongside professional athletes and switching between different characters. I even had an imaginary friend named Donjo, who I played with endlessly, which I still hear about from my brothers and my mother. But I like to define imagination as envisioning possibilities, outcomes, solutions, and events that may or not be realistic or plausible, but imagination allows us to generate creative or objective ideas to navigate situations. Throughout this concept map, I'm going to break down my thinking by exploring how I interpreted each week of the reading through different worlds. The first part of my concept map highlights my interpretation of some of the main themes from Chapter 2 of Rua Benjamin's book, Imagination, a Manifesto. Some of the key ideas that shifted the way I think about imagination were oppressive imagination and imagination as power. As I walk through this area that resembles a place of poverty, it represents the oppressive imagination that people with power and wealth oppose on the majority. This space doesn't just symbolize the physical conditions that dominant cultural normalizes, but also the cultural norms we have been conditioned to accept through top-down governance and media. Just as imagination can be oppressive, those same people use their imagination to make life better for themselves and others in positions of power. Imagination becomes power when you can create inequalities in the name of innovation. Benjamin illustrates this when she writes, "When Musk's spaceflight company SpaceX moved to Texas, people and wildlife were pushed out because rocket activity made the surrounding area unsafe. At the same time that Jeff Bezos took a 4-minute, $5.5 billion trip on a lunar lander, Amazon warehouse workers continue to race against the clock to make ends meet. And as I move up these stairs, this represents the spatial hierarchy that powerful people occupy, living comfortably above the rest of society while prompting ideas we consume, often knowing the consequences. Those who hold imaginative power continue to envision a world where innovation benefits a few while the rest remain divided." Benjamin asks, why can we imagine growing heart cells from scratch in a lab, but not growing empathy for other humans in our everyday lives, and even more in our institutions? Even if the world were ending, and we can imagine a solution that allowed everyone to live without inequalities, how could we achieve that in a culture dominated by the marketplace? Imagination as Soil is a metaphor introduced by Gillian Judson in her article, Cultivating Leadership Imagination with Cognitive Tools, an imagination-focused approach to leadership education. It helps define imagination and explain how it can create better educational or moral leaders. Justin writes that soil represents the potential and the possibility. Everything grows from an idea, and although soil is often overlooked, it contains the nutrients that allow great things to develop. Emotion, knowledge, and experience are the nutrients of imagination. As I dig into soil, I find a range of colors representing emotional intelligence. With greater emotional intelligence, a moral leader can understand and imagine the consequences of their decisions on others. As I dig deeper, we reach a classroom that represents knowledge. When a leader has more knowledge, it fuels imagination with ideas that are plausible and actionable. With knowledge, emotion, and intelligence and experience, a leader becomes more capable of making moral decisions. In today's society, a strong educational leader is someone who uses imagination effectively, because dreaming up innovative ideas that fails does not demonstrate strong leadership. I firmly believe that children have a better imaginations than adults, but because they lack the knowledge, experience, and emotional intelligence, they cannot yet be great leaders and often think of ideas that are not realistic. Growing up in a technological world that constantly feeds students information and creative content means they often don't need to learn or experience life lessons on their own. Transformative agency and critical imagination are two themes discussed by Tors Olof, Armanoglu, and Mora in the article Critical Imagination for Transformative Agency, Pedagogies for Science Teacher Education. I walk through these houses to represent transformative agency because we need to imagine what the future could look like and how we could get there. It is important for students to imagine a future that is improved or different from what we know now, and to envision a pathway towards that future. As an educational system, we need to teach students to critically examine and visualize a world free from the oppressive ideologies discussed earlier. If we want transformative agency, educators must design a curriculum that begins with why and how. Why is it important for students to learn this content, and how can we teach it effectively? As I zoom out of my world, I want to conclude that imagination is an essential element of education because it allows students to critically examine their world and imagine what is possible when they believe in themselves and their ideas. In a world full of hate, inequality, rules, social structures, and cultural norms, students often feel like their life is being drained out of them. But I believe imagination and play offer a way for students to rediscover the joy in education and in life.